it. I said, oh, something I wrote actually won an award. So that inspired me to blog more. I kept blogging. If you go back to my blog, every single day I would have posted something. And around that time, I started writing for Times of India. I started writing for Reader's Digest. Some of my pieces came in Chicken Soup for the Soul. Some of my poetry was published in the Sulekha book series. And then the natural progression of all this was into my first book, which was 34 Bubblegums and Candies.
So how did the story for your first book come about? Did you have something in mind that I'm going to write about this, or did it just flow? Was it something you observed? How did it happen for you? I'm very curious about these things, and as I told Ravi back there, I keep asking authors, how do you all come? How do you all talk? How do you all do your stories?
Yeah, my first book was a collection of 34 real life incidents, and they were all incidents which happened to me or my friends. In fact, I met that friend the other day, and he says, I have to be very careful what I'm going to say in front of you. You might just go and write it in your book. And that was non-fiction. So I told him, no, I write only fiction now. He's saying then I have to be doubly careful.
We authors are like that. Everyone is material for us.
Yeah, true. Because even when I was coming today at the airport, I'm looking at people. I said, oh, okay, such interesting stories. I'm making up stories about them in my head.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you do that too, Kiran, right?
That's a fault here. I'm going to confess it in public. Coming back to The Secret Wishlist, I've read this book. It's a beautiful book. It's a book about, I don't know, how many of you all have read this book here? Okay, so I'm not going to give the story away, but it's basically the story of this lady Diksha, who's married, who's 35, and she's at a spot in her life where she's a little discontented with what's happening around her. And I found that very relatable because even my character Kay, she's at the same point in her life where she, nothing is happening. She's had a kid. She doesn't know what to do with herself.
Yes.
How did the idea of writing about Diksha come for you? This thing about the secret wish list. All of us have a secret wish list in our head, but nobody articulates this.
True. See, I'm a great believer in the law of attraction. I'm a huge believer because I know it works. To a non-believer, it may sound very illogical. Oh, how crazy. You just make a wish list and it comes true. But what I feel is that, our thoughts shape us. We are what we are today because of our thoughts. And what happens is, when you make a wish list, these thoughts become intentions. And when you write them down, somewhere in the subconscious, these intentions become goals. And then we, subconsciously work towards our goals. So what the question, coming to answer the question that you asked, how this came about. See, somebody very close to me, this was about, she got married very young. She was 19 when she got married, and this was about 18 years back. So she got married, and you know how it was at that time. And she was sent off to the US. And her husband abandoned her. He had an affair, and she was pregnant as well. So you can imagine the trauma which she was going through. She refused to come back. She said, I'm going to live in the US. I'm going to have my child here. I'm going to raise my child. And I find her journey very inspirational. So she had a daughter, and she raised her daughter. She was raising her daughter there, and one afternoon it snowed. So she was snowed in, there was nothing much she could do. And just for a lark, she sat down and she wrote, she made this little book just to cheer herself up. She made this book, she made it very special, and she wrote all her wishes in it. And then, whenever she would find pictures in magazines of things which she had written about, she would stick it in this book. Interesting. Yeah, and then she forgot about it. And about 9 years later, when she found this book in the attic, and she says when she opened it, from the 11 wishes, 9 wishes had come true. Okay. And it was really amazing. I could relate to it. So she spoke to me. She called me up from the US. She is a citizen now, and she's made all her dreams come true. So she and I were discussing. She says, see, what happens is when you write them down, somewhere it becomes a goal, and it's easier to fulfill a goal than a wish.
Absolutely.
And then you break it down into little bits. She went on to complete her education. And she's working at a very reputed place now, and she's doing really well for herself.
Okay.
So, all of that finds its way into the book.
Would you like to read a passage? I'm sure all of us would like to hear Preeti reading from the book. Would you like to read a passage that really is a defining moment for you in the book, or something that means a bit extra from the rest of it?
Okay, so I'll just start with the prologue. See, the book is written in a very interesting manner. It starts in the present. and it goes to the past, and it switches back to the present, it goes to the past, and that sets the pace for the rest of the book. So I'll just read the prologue. The conversation with Tanu has reminded me with startling intensity of the person I used to be. A person with hopes, ambitions, and a desire to live life to the brim. I was just like Tanu, bubbly, enthusiastic, and positive. I think about Ankit. I think about that kiss. I have replayed everything that happened on that day at least 1,000,000 times in my mind through all these years. I loved him with all the purity and innocence of a 16-year-old heart. I was certain that at that time that he loved me too. I wonder how he looks now. I wonder what I will feel if I were ever to meet him again. It is ironic how the years change you and yet you remain the same. Even if you're married, become a parent, deep down you're still the person you were before you became all of that. Later, as I cook the afternoon meal, Ankit dances around in my head. He refuses to go away when I serve my mother-in-law her meal and make inane conversation with her. He is still with me when I greet Abhay back from school and remains there when I help him with homework. And later that night, when my husband, after his usual round of television viewing, comes to bed and squeezes my breasts and has sex with me, he is still there. I lie awake a long time that night, the darkness of my bedroom punctuated by Sandeep's rhythmic post-coital snoring. I realize with a jolt that Ankit had never really left. He has been in my head all along. And now that the possibility of reconnecting with him has been presented to me on a platter, it makes me intensely restless. It is as though someone has poured a can of gasoline to the already blazing fire and turmoil within my heart. Somewhere at the back of my mind, warning bells are clanging, but their sounds are very feeble, almost muffled. The voice of my heart is too darn loud. When you cannot get someone out of your head for 18 years, it has to be true love. So that's how the book starts off. So it leaves you at a very interesting point. What does she do? Is she going to get back in touch with this person who means the world to her? But she's already married and, she has... And then, that sets the tone for rest of the book. And then the first chapter starts with a scene in school. So she's the 16-year-old Diksha. And I must confess, so, there's one incident which happened to me when I was 16, which has found its way into the book, which was an exchanged bag incident. That's there in the first chapter. So I won't give away, much of it.
What I do notice, Preeti, is you haven't shied away from talking about that three-letter word that most of us Indian authors don't talk about, sex.
True,
it's right there in your prologue and you talk about it. And I noticed in your first book there was this very conscious shying away from discussing things like this. And you have grown up as an author and you're much more comfortable talking about various things.
True. See, in the first book was non-fiction. So, and it's all incidents from my life. So that very clearly, sets the mark for not talking about sex. The second book, it was a story of a young girl. So she never really, when you're young, when you're at that age in India, at least you don't have sex. So, but the third book, it was about a married woman. And extramarital affairs, all of this is a real part of our lives. So I couldn't shy away from but I must confess I was very nervous when I was writing. I was so scared it would sound like porn, I said, oh, okay, I've written this. How does it sound? So I went back, I read it. And that's
you
how...
smoothed it out.
Sorry?
You made sure it was not porn.
Yeah, absolutely,
But we have 50 Shades of Grey that's racking up.
True. I haven't read it though. Have you read it, Kiran?
2 chapters.
Okay.
I couldn't go further.
Okay. I haven't yet read it, though I plan to.
You plan to?
So I did read Bride Strip Bear and I loved it. Nikki Jamal.
Okay. Which brings me to another thing I must ask you. Who are your inspirations as authors?